All right, welcome to the conversation. Got a great guest for you guys. Matt Ferner, he's a senior analyst at Safer Cities. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Cenk. Really happy to be here.
No problem. So a lot of people are talking about crime. Certainly Trump ran on it in 2020. Oh my God, Biden's America, we're all gonna melt. So has anarchy broken out? We at approximately 98% crime at this point, whatever that means. Give us the facts.
Right. No. I'm happy to report we are not. But Cenk, you're so right. I mean, this is the fear-mongering that has led to the incarceration crisis that we are suffering from in this country and has been here for so long. And that kind of American carnage sort of rhetoric that Trump was so good at deploying, and other kind of master blowhards like Tucker Carlson, who's the subject of our study, or his rhetoric, and also Miami Police Chief Art Acevedo. These guys know how to do this. I mean, they're talented at this, and they use it to win elections. And as you know, I mean, this has been a playbook for decades, largely deployed by Republicans to win elections, for maybe 50 years. But Republicans and Democrats alike have a lot of blame in using this kind of language to scare voters and to drive a punitive policy in this country. But thankfully, no, we are not in a dystopian hellscape yet.
Yeah. So there's a Democrat who was so-called tough on crime that passed one of the worst bills in my lifetime. His name was Joe Biden. So it's not like Democrats don't do it, but yes, Republicans have made an art out of scaring white folks about minorities under the guise of crime. So just quick factual check with you, and then I want to talk about your study on Tucker Carlson. So did crime go up in 2021 now that Joe Biden is president? Is murders run amok in New York, for example, in the big blue cities that are they call them blue now. It's like, oh no, we're just criticizing Democrats. Of course, they're talking about cities that have large minority populations. Of course. Okay, so what actually happened with crime?
Right. I mean, that's right, Cenk. I mean, so overall crime is down, but importantly, homicides are up from 2020 year over year, and there's a lot of kind of screaming headlines about this stuff, and it's understandable. I mean, homicides are tragic in our communities, and attention to them and solving those and trying to find ways to increase solving rates of those for our police departments is critical. But also, it's important to note and to understand that homicides in particular are down overall. I mean, by an enormous margin, right? And you know this, Cenk. You've talked about this on your show a number of times. But in the 1990s, right, where we see the really serious spike in homicides, we're nowhere near those numbers. So while they're in 2020, we saw this increase. It's nowhere near where it once was, and I think in our own research we've looked into at least public attitudes about this, and I think there's been some other writing and some other research around this and looking into what may have driven this. And these are complex issues. I mean, crime in particular, any kind of crime, violent or so-called non-violent crime. I mean, what drives these rates up and down are a number of factors. But I mean, I think it's safe to assume and to think about a historic pandemic, which led to so much social and economic disruption for people, to be a cause. And so to see some of this spike in 2020, like we saw, I think there's reasonable. I think reasonable people can agree that that may have been a very major factor. So that's the state of.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Kayleigh McEnany thing, right? Where the Republicans were like, can you believe crime went up in 2020? Dude, Trump was president.
Right.
At what point do you think you're making? But in 2021, by the way, overall crime is down 3.3%. Major offenses are down 4.8%. There's some cities with significant homicide issues, but New York is not among them. They usually talk about that in the context of, oh, it's a liberal city and stuff. Homicides down in New York. So, and there's of course a lot of factors. We did talk about it on TYT before. I think COVID is driving a lot of it. But so now let's talk about the political aspect of it. What was your study on Tucker Carlson? What did you guys find?
Yes, so our group is very curious about crime and public safety and how the public thinks about it. And so we looked, and fear-mongering in particular around public safety and around response or crime control is just has driven so many bad policies for so many decades, as you know, Cenk. And so we're always looking at how politicians, how the media are talking about these issues. And so we were just curious because of some of the trends you've talked about here already. There's this historic fear-mongering playbook, we know exists and has driven, a lot of bad policy in this country. Both Democrats and Republicans guilty of that. But then there's been some, in the last few years, some interesting countervailing trends, let's say, that made us want to look into this a little bit further. So, we see Joe Biden won, for example, right? He defeated Trump. We also see this failed effort to recall California Governor Gavin Newsom, also driven by Republicans in a fear-mongering kind of way, to make California seem like this sort of dystopia hellscape. And then earlier in the summer, we saw someone like Melanie Stansbury, who won that suburban House seat. Her Republican opponent really tried to make that race into a referendum about crime rates rising in Albuquerque, but she defeated him really resoundingly. So we've seen this interesting trend. So we decided to look into it with our study. So we ran these series of studies. In order to make it as realistic for the people that participated in it, we used just these master fearmongers like Tucker Carlson, like Art Acevedo, to build rhetoric into the study using their real language. And so we looked at what they say. We added in some context to make the study make sense for people. So the study, people would see a statement from like what was identified as their police chief or a mayor or a sheriff, but it was using their language in the fear-mongering context, often by Tucker Carlson or by Art Acevedo. And what that would be was like, emphasizing rising crime, emphasizing danger, emphasizing a kind of revolving door within our criminal justice systems, this baseless kind of language that these folks use. And then we present the respondents with a non-fear-based kind of rhetoric, which was about the same kind of public official responding to a crime in a community, but and with urgency, but not using fear-mongering, using accountability language instead. And what we found was really interesting and I think encouraging. I think it's good for our country, at least, to see this power of fear-mongering waning a bit with American voters. It's not that it's gone, but it's waning. And what we saw was that respondents really responded well to the accountability language and did not respond as powerfully to the fear-mongering language as historically it seems they had. Of course, this is our first study. We don't have study or data from previous years, but we all know these trends that we were just talking about. And so to see that and to see that perhaps there's a voting public out there that has grown tired or just this sort of fear-mongering language no longer impacts them in the same way or doesn't rile them up in the same way is I think great news.
So Matt, I don't know if you have this level of specificity right in front of you, but I'd be curious to see the age breakdown in that study. So my guess would be that for the younger people that you talk to, that they would be a lot less susceptible to the fear-mongering, and older folks would be more susceptible, not because of age so much, but because of the culture that those two different demographics grew up in America. But I don't know, so so that's why I ask.
Yeah, Jake, no, it's a good question. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I'm sorry, but that's roughly right off of my memory of the findings. Age did play a factor, and unsurprisingly, I mean, and I think you're sort of touching on this as well. Conservative voters were definitely they drove the feelings. When reporting feeling less safe, it was conservative respondents more than the people who are identifying as Democrats than their respondents. So what we're measuring, what we're seeing in our findings is largely driven. The lack of response is largely driven by the Democratic voter demographic, and less so from the conservative side. So you're very much right. These sorts of things,
yeah,
really make a difference.
As we're talking it through, Matt, one thing became kind of apparent to me that I'd always wondered about the hypocrisy and the contradiction that's built into conservatives mainly being driven by fear, like, oh my God, oh crime, and all this different, oh my God, war, people are gonna attack us, terrorists, right? All these things, oh gay people, oh my God, oh black people, right? And but yet they pretend that they want alpha males and oh, we're all so tough, we don't, not like the liberals, they're soft and stuff. And now I just connected it, of course, because they're role playing, they're so afraid, they're puffing up their chest in a way that's obviously fake, because inside they're super scared, and that's what mainly drives them. So last question for you as we're running out of time here. Since the data's coming in it's not working that well politically, and both in your study and in the real world, where a lot of people ran on this, and you've got examples of that in your work. And not just Joe Biden, but at the local level, very clearly they ran anti-crime, fear-mongering ads, and they lost. Is there a chance that Republicans go away from it because it's just not working?
Well, I mean, I think that's the great hope, isn't it, Cenk? I mean, you'd love to see a politics that didn't rely on this kind of just toxic rhetoric and thinking, because it really drives very dangerous policies that have hollowed out so many communities, have hurt millions of Americans. And I can't say, our research doesn't go that deep. It's hard to know, but the sort of counterpoint, or the point that I think is what you're making, and I think is right, is that this is encouraging. I mean, I think an enterprising person who wanted to run for office and not use fear-mongering rhetoric, which in some ways is driven by trend lines, right? I mean, you may or may not believe in this stuff, but the playbook is there, and if you want to win elections, maybe you just rely on the playbook. It's like you don't have to go very far in your imagination to try to figure out a way to win. Maybe this research, maybe these trend lines will help people think of a different way to win elections. That there's constituencies out there to build that don't respond to it anymore. And in fact, they do want accountability. They want public safety, of course, but they don't want it with the conditions that historically these groups of people, these kinds of people like Tucker, like Art Acevedo, like Donald Trump, have used to drive us against one another and really actually make us less safe.
Yeah, and by the way, if you arrest people based on random things like the color of their skin, as opposed to who actually did it, you don't actually have accountability, and you don't have justice, and you have more crime, not less crime, because you didn't actually catch the guy who did it, because you were arresting randos based on characteristics that have nothing to do with who actually did it. So that's also coming in. All right, we are out of time. The study's called Likely Voters Grow Weary of Fear-Mongering Around Crime. It's from Safer Cities. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Cenk. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.